Thank you all for joining us here at I-80 Sports, where today we're talking about some NHL trade deadline predictions, talking a little bit about what we talked about previously in a previous episode, as well as some new predictions as we approach the trade deadline coming up quite soon. As always, guys, thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Thank you all for joining us here again at I-80 Sports. Still got to work on the timing on that intro, but since you're here on YouTube, hopefully here on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe, hit the bell, make sure you comment down below with some of your trade deadline predictions as well as we slowly approach the trade deadline. It's really kind of crazy that we're already almost a week away from the NHL trade deadline at this point. Just wild to think. But make sure you subscribe down below and comment and like while you're there as well. You can also find our content down below at i80sports.com. You can find our NHL, NFL, NCAA football, MLS, NBA, and wrestling content there as well. While you're there, hit up the shop, get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8. We're slowly approaching spring. You definitely need some new t-shirts. Yours are probably crusty, dusty, and ratty and ready to turn into a towel. So get yourself a new t-shirt while you're there. And if you're on Twitter, make sure you follow us down below at I80_sportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you guys so much for all of your support. Without you guys, we can't do this on a weekly basis. I'm Brian. He's Tom. Tom, how are you doing today?
Doing well. And here we are. We're approaching one of the best times of the year as a hockey fan, I guess, depending on how you look at it, the trade deadline. So a lot of interesting names being thrown around. So I'd be curious to see what happens over the next few weeks.
I think it was Andy Williams that once sang, "It's the most wonderful time of the year." Yes, it's trade deadline time. It's time to put the tinfoil hats on and really kind of dive into these predictions. Where are some of these players going? Who's going to be packing their stuff, as Scott Hartnell and, who else? Mike Commodore would say, of course, I'm also paraphrasing, pack your stuff. You can kind of figure out what I really mean there. But, if you know, you know. All right. But first, we got to talk about some quick little news tidbits before we dive into some trade deadline predictions. Let's hit up the traffic report and see what's going on.
The I-80 Sports Traffic Report, where you can find all your news and notes from the week.
Not a lot going on this week, honestly. A pretty slow news week in the NHL, but we got to kind of compare and contrast real quick because we had two recent extensions that happened in the NHL. First and foremost, the Seattle Kraken have re-signed forward Jared McCann to a 5-year, $25 million extension. And also, on the flip side, the Philadelphia Flyers have extended Rasmus Ristolainen, the moose of a defenseman. They extended him for 5 years at $25.5 million. So the question I ask you here, Tom, is who's getting the better deal here? Does Seattle win? Does Philadelphia win with this? What is your quick reaction to both?
To tell you the truth, it's a little bit of a head scratcher with both. I mean, Ristolainen, $5.1 million over 5 years. I guess it's a good thing, but I mean, Philly's sort of a rebuilding team, so it's like, okay, you have that $5 million tied up in him, but you don't know who you're going to draft. You don't know where you're going to go in 5 years, where you may need to use that money elsewhere. Seattle was sort of kind of a fail-safe thing. I mean, Seattle's sort of just playing with the house money right now, Seattle. There's only one. They can only go up, Seattle. I don't think they can go any further down than they're going, and that's not a bad thing. They're an expansion team. Remember that. They've been around not even a year yet. So I'm going to go with Seattle on this one. Philly's kind of a head scratcher. But then again, the Flyers lately like to do head scratching things over the past few years.
Yeah, I think I like the Seattle deal a little bit more. I think just looking at Jared McCann's point totals from this past year. I mean, admittedly, on a Seattle Kraken team that has had difficulty scoring. He seems to be one of the only players, realistically, that is defying that. In 51 games thus far this year, he has 21 goals, 12 assists, 33 points overall. Not bad. The plus minus total is a nothing category there because Seattle has just been that bad this year. He's a negative 21. Obviously, you wish that's a little bit higher. But realistically, this is a productive hockey player right now for Seattle. And at 25 years old, for 5 more years, putting him to 30 years old, you're getting the prime years out of Jared McCann right now. And if he's scoring 21 goals right now, the hope is that it only gets better from here. Maybe he becomes a 25 to 30 goal scorer, a consistent 25 to 30 goal scorer with the Seattle Kraken. One can only hope. On the Rasmus Sandon side of things for Philadelphia Flyers, I don't know if I like this deal, to be quite honest. I mean, granted, he's going to be taking a bit of a pay cut after this year. He's making $5.4 million this year. He'll be making about $5 million even starting next year. But when you really kind of look at not only his point total this year, obviously, yes, he is a defenseman. Defensemen don't normally get a ton of points. But in 49 games, 2 goals, 11 assists, 13 points. He's a negative 11. Not great. And then you look at the advanced statistics, and the advanced statistics really don't favor him. He is one of the most unfavorable defensive defensemen in the entire National Hockey League right now, according to the advanced statistics. I don't know. I don't know if this was the best move for a rebuilding Philadelphia Flyers team or even a retooling Philadelphia Flyers team. Time will only tell. I don't see the logic here. I think Philadelphia could have done a lot better with this deal, or maybe even managing the money a little bit better for Rasmus Sandon. But hey, time will only tell what happens from here. Okay, we got a couple quick hits that we got to get out of the way before our trade predictions. First and foremost, Jack Campbell, starting goaltender for the Toronto Maple Leafs. He is going to be out for at least the next 2 weeks with a rib injury. There's some fueling talks that maybe Toronto might be looking at a backup solution there in case Jack Campbell might be out longer. We'll just have to see what happens there. And moving on to the Vegas Golden Knights side of things, Tom's favorite team right now. It seems like starting goaltender Robin Lehner is going to be sent back home for reevaluation on his current injury. His current status is unknown in terms of how long he might be out for. It's leaving the Vegas Golden Knights, scrambling a little bit. And spoiler alert for our trade predictions, maybe have links to a former netminder of theirs. So we'll have to see what kind of happens there. And we're going to talk about that in our trade predictions. So more on that in a little bit if you want to hear about it. But that's about all I have in terms of news. Tom, was there any kind of quick hits that I missed there?
No, I'm just shaking my head at what Vegas is doing, but I can talk about that later.
We can literally waste an entire video on how Vegas is messing up right now, but they're going to be an active team more than likely at the trade deadline. Their name could be popping up quite a number of times here in our trade predictions segment. But now we're moving on to our trade predictions. So as always, it's time to pump the brakes.
Not so fast. It's time to pump the brakes.
So we're talking trade deadline predictions right now, which if you're not keeping track at home, the trade deadline is very, very, very quickly creeping up. And it's currently slated for Monday, March 21st at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So a lot can happen between now and then. It's been eerily quiet, though, on all Western fronts at the moment, though. Actually, just reading some articles and just listening to some interviews related to the New Jersey Devils. General Manager Tom Fitzgerald actually talked about how it's actually kind of odd how quiet it is right now among all NHL teams as we approach the deadline. But that could only mean we could be getting a very, very, very exciting trade deadline coming up where we see a lot of wheeling and dealing within the 48 hours leading up to the trade deadline. So we're going to have to see what happens, and we're here to predict it all. And as always, guys, with our predictions, make sure you comment down below with your predictions. We want to hear from you guys. We want to have a conversation with you. So the only way you do that, let us know down below and comment down below. But we're going to start by talking about a few obvious names here first, where we think they could be going, maybe if they could be staying. And actually, our thoughts are actually kind of organized here. We got to give courtesy and thanks here to the fourthperiod.com, who has a really, really handy trade watch list currently on their website, sponsored by Upper Deck. And it's a really organized list. I think there's a lot of names on here that could honestly be on the move here. A lot of names that honestly maybe could wait until the summertime to finally be on the move. But we're going to talk about some of these names right now. We're going to go quickly as we can through as many names as we possibly can right now. Starting up right off the top of this list right now, left-handed defenseman Jacob Chitrin, currently playing for the Arizona Coyotes. And he is a really interesting name here as we approach the deadline because he's a bit of a building block for the Arizona Coyotes and just not playing up to his potential right now with Arizona. And it's no fault of his own. It's just Arizona is just that bad of a team. And if you really don't know, check any stat out there with how bad Arizona is. So let's talk a little bit about this. Tom, where do you think Jacob Chitrin could end up? Do you think he stays in Arizona or is he on the move?
I highly doubt he stays. Now, I'm looking at the teams reportedly linked to him. Now, if I'm Arizona, you look at two teams there on that list, which are LA and Anaheim, and that's maybe who you want to target because they have some young assets and some draft capital that you might want to have, which they already have a ton of anyway. But at the same time, if you're those two teams and you're, a little unsure about the playoffs, you're unsure if you're a contender yet or not. And believe me, LA is playing well, but LA, this could be a very well an outlier year for LA. They could very well have a good year this year and miss next year. That team Vegas, who I love so much, could catch fire and push LA back out. Vegas and Anaheim could. So I'm not so sure those two are going to be real. I mean, they're in the mix now, but I'm not so sure they're going to be in the mix later on. You know what? I mean, I could see Florida or Carolina going for him. I think he could fit in nicely there. Boston, so I guess Boston, depending on where you want to play him too. I don't know if you're going to play him in the first pair if he goes to Boston. Toronto's another one, but what does Toronto have to give to Arizona to make the deal worth it? And sort of the same principle with St. Louis. What does St. Louis have to give to them to make the deal worth it? So I'm going to say Florida or Carolina right now. I just think those would probably be the two most obvious ones for him.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to just straight out say right now, sorry, Toronto fans, I just don't see Jacob Chitrin going home to Toronto. I just don't see it. I don't see that as a viable option for him to go to. First of all, Toronto really doesn't have the cap space for him right now. He's got a cap hit of $4.6 million. It would be great to pick him up for a building team like Toronto, for a team that's destined for a deeper cup run in the near future, maybe even this year. But I just don't see it. They really don't have the capital to trade. You have Rodion and Amirov that could potentially be leaving in a deal like this. You have Timothy Littlerin, which you really don't know what you really have in him at the moment. And there's definitely, a little bit of a casted doubt on his projection in the NHL. But then you also have to talk about potential NHL rostered players that you might give up. Rasmus Sandon is a guy that I look at as a guy that almost certainly would have to leave Toronto in a deal like this, in a comparable move like this. Plus, multiple picks, high draft picks as well, first and second and third round picks, at least in a deal like this. And I just don't see Toronto as a viable option because of that. The cap issues, coupled with the capital that they currently have, they're just not set up in a place where I think they can realistically take him on. I think Los Angeles could be a very good destination for him, although I don't know how willing Los Angeles would actually be to, spring to give up certain assets right now. But that being said, I think LA would be salivating at the idea of Drew Doughty and Jacob Chitrin on the same defensive pairing. That could be one of the best defensive pairings in the entire NHL if that was put together. One team that I would say to really kind of look out for is Anaheim. I actually think Anaheim could be a team that makes a lot of sense in a move like this. They've got plenty of cap space. They have plenty to give. Plus, they can also unload another NHL defenseman in Hampus Lindholm, who I know that they're looking to potentially ship off as well. This is one of those deals that could end up making a lot of sense on paper for both teams, for Arizona and for Anaheim. And I think that could be a very friendly destination for Jacob Chitrin. So I'm going to say Anaheim, though admittedly, I'll be interested to see if this is a deal that does get done before the deadline. Moving on, here's a name that we brought up in our previous predictions. And since then, our predictions have slowly changed a little bit here. At least mine have. Claude Giroux. And we had a lot of people saying he would go one place, another saying he would go another place. Tom, has your prediction changed on Claude Giroux? What do you think? Is he still going to Colorado or no?
Well, here's the thing. I think Giroux wants. I think Claude Giroux does want to go to Colorado. The problem is, I'm not so sure Joe Sakic wants to pay the ransom that Philly is wanting for Claude Giroux. If there's one thing we've learned about Sakic over the years, it's this. He's a very forward-thinking, progressive-minded GM. And I think in his mind, he's going, and I mean, look, the results are right there. I mean, look, so many people consider Nathan MacKinnon a bust, and now look where he is. So, I mean, if you look at Joe Sakic, in his mind, he's going, I'm potentially going to go give up some prospects and some younger assets for this guy who may or may not win me a Stanley Cup, and then he either A, retires in the summer, or B, we can't come to an agreement with him and he walks and I'm left with nothing. So I think that's really in the back of Joe Sakic's mind. He's never been one to Joe Sakic is kind of been the opposite of the brain trust in Vegas, where it's go, 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 go. Sakic's like, not so fast, not so fast, not so fast, not so fast. I think he still should go to Colorado. I think that that's a prime destination for him. I think playing on the second line with Kadri following that first line is going to make them more of a cup favorite than they already are. But it's just a matter of if they come to an agreement. Another team that's been thrown in, and he initially had said he either wanted Colorado, St. Louis, or Minnesota. With the exception of Minnesota's play against the Rangers the other night, Minnesota's kind of been a Jekyll and Hyde team. So as much as he said he wanted to go there, you really got to think, are you going to leave Philadelphia to go to a bubble team? I don't know about that. St. Louis could be a viable destination. But at the end of the day, is St. Louis even going to get out of that Central Division with Colorado right up on top of them? Another team that's been linked as of late are the Florida Panthers. That could make a lot of sense. That could, it could bolster the Panthers into more of a contender than they already are. But what have I been saying about the Panthers? What have I been saying about them? The Panthers have shown me nothing in the playoffs. I picked them to beat the Bolts last year in the first round. They couldn't get it done. The year before, they couldn't get out of the play-in round against the Islanders. And believe me, I tooted the Islanders' horns the past two postseasons. But, I mean, you look on paper in 2020 with the Islanders lineup and the Panthers should have beat the Islanders in that play-in round. I'm sorry. So the real question is, it would be a great addition to Florida. Yes. What if Florida chokes it in the playoffs again this year? And they can't come to an agreement next year. You're stuck in the same situation. A third team linked, and this may be a team that I'm reading up now that I have in the headline, the Boston Bruins. And that may be a no-lose situation. He goes to Boston, and I think a lot of us, including myself, are thinking that maybe this is Boston's real last kick at the can. You add him to Boston for a playoff run in an Eastern Conference that's outside of Tampa Bay is wide open right now. I think Boston could be an interesting fit if they're able to come to a conclusion, to come to an agreement. But Boston, what does Boston have asset-wise to give back to the Flyers? That's the other thing. And that's why I could see it not working with the Bruins. The reality is that, I could see the Flyers, if he does go to Boston, the Flyers easily getting burned on that deal. So, all interesting ones. I still think Colorado, but if not, part of me is thinking Florida. But Florida, it's a huge, huge risk just knowing their history in the playoffs as of late.
I think realistically, there are two teams that I think are in the sweepstakes for Claude Giroux. I think one is the obvious one that has been talked for months now in Colorado. Though there is some rumblings that Joe Sakic might not be willing, as Tom alluded to before, to give up the King's ransom that it would take to get Claude Giroux, which is totally understandable. Claude Giroux is a rental player meaning you're only getting him for the remainder of this year, and there's no guarantee that you're going to sign him in the offseason when he's an unrestricted free agent. And that's a real risk when purchasing a rental player. You're giving up assets for the future to pick up a guy who's not guaranteed to give you anything past whatever he gives you towards the end of the season. And I think Colorado is slowly pivoting away from Claude Giroux in favor of another player that we might talk about a little bit later, though we can talk a little bit about it now. There's some rumblings that Colorado may be linked to leading scorer on the Vancouver Canucks, JT Miller. And that would be an interesting move. I think it might be more advantageous for Colorado just because you have to give up at least Bowen Byram and others to get a deal like that done. But the one benefit over Claude Giroux is you have JT Miller for another year after this. He has control, which Colorado... You can interject. Go for it.
Can I interject? You know what? After watching Vancouver last night and the way they've been playing, I don't think they're letting anybody go anywhere.
They might not, and that's true. That's honestly very, very true. Unless the deal just fell on Vancouver's lap to like a deal that they absolutely could not refuse. Yeah, I don't really see it either, but never say never. Never say never. That's the only reason why I say Colorado might pull away from Claude Giroux. The team that I think that does make a lot of sense for the Philadelphia Flyers in terms of what they could get back is Florida. Namely, if you're giving up Claude Giroux, the hope is that you're getting at least prospect Owen Tippett and others back in that deal. And I think that is the clear centerpiece to get a deal done with Florida. I think Florida would have to deal at least Owen Tippett, at least a high round pick, at least a first round pick, more than likely, maybe a second round pick next year, and maybe another prospect to be thrown in there. Maybe a player like Saron Noel, somebody who's higher up on that prospect list as well for the Florida Panthers. I think ideally you get rid of an NHL ready player, but Owen Tippett has some NHL time logged at this point. He could be that NHL ready player that Philadelphia could get back in return here. I don't know. For me, I just think that Florida makes a lot of sense for Claude Giroux. I think Claude Giroux would fit very, very well with the Florida Panthers in that top six. And he's a player that, can be your Swiss Army knife. He can play center. He could play wing. He could play power play. He could play penalty kill. He's a player that I think, does a lot of everything. And that is a type of player that Florida really, really needs at this point. A player that does a lot of everything and changes the vibe in the locker room as well. He is a natural locker room leader. He's been the captain of the Philadelphia Flyers for a long time now. And I think adding leadership like that in the locker room, couple that with other leaders that are already currently in that locker room, and Alexander Barkov and Jonathan Huberto, even Joe Thornton, I think there's a lot of good that comes with Claude Giroux going to Florida. But don't count out Colorado. Colorado could, Joe Sakic could bring up Philadelphia closer to the deadline and said, you know what? Yeah, let's do it and pull the trigger on something. So either way, Claude Giroux is going to be on the move. It's just going to be a matter of where. Now we're going to talk about a dicey player here. We're going to talk about a player here that I think could end up being the regret of the trade deadline. I'm going to predict that now, that he is going to be the player that a team is going to pull the trigger on and they're going to regret it later on. That player in question is defenseman Ben Sharat for the Montreal Canadiens, because what they're asking right now for Sharat is, it's stupid. They're asking for a first round pick and more for him. I don't think he's worth that. I mean, Tom, you might disagree there, but I just don't see him being worth that. I see it almost like a David Savard of last year, where he's a player realistically that probably wasn't worth that. Did he win a Stanley Cup? Yeah, absolutely he did. But was he really worth a first round pick? Probably not. So, Tom, where do you think Sharat's going? Do you think he stays in Montreal? Do you think he's going elsewhere? What team do you think gives up the assets to get him?
I could very well see him staying in Montreal just because that asking price is beyond ridiculous. I two teams that may bite are St. Louis and Calgary. Obviously, St. Louis still has the horses from the run in 2019, and that's a depth guy to add to possibly go for another run. Calgary as well, being in that Pacific Division, it might work out for the best for Calgary. But at the same time, that asking price is a little much for a guy who's a rental. And, I think the thing with Tampa last year and Savard was I think Tampa knew that they could go out and win a second cup in a row. I think when you look out west right now at St. Louis and Calgary, Calgary, I think, could maybe get to a Western Conference final. St. Louis, if you ask me, they might be a one-round and done team. And if you're going to give up that much for a player that's going to play with you for a couple regular season games and a round or two in the playoffs, I just don't think it's worth it. I don't think it's worth it. LA, if they were to do it, would be ridiculously dumb. Florida's there. Florida, it might actually make some sense for. You're adding some depth with Florida in a tough Atlantic division. The Rangers better not do it because they have enough young defensemen there who they can develop. We don't need them. I don't want them. And that goes for the guy below him too, John Klingberg as well. Don't want him anywhere near this team. The team needs some depth forwards who can play in a middle six role. We don't need Chariot. We don't need Klingberg. We don't need these guys. We have two solid defensive pairs. We have Patrick Nemeth who can play in the third pair. You have guys like Braden Schneider and Zach Jones and Nils Lundqvist, who everybody decided to give up on for what reason I still can't figure out, who's actually starting to tear it up down in Hartford now. So, all these people, you go out against Winnipeg the other night and win, and everybody talking, future Stanley Cup champions this year. I'm sorry. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. And bringing either of these two guys in would be a mistake for the Rangers' sake. So if I'm talking Chariot, I'm thinking in St. Louis or Calgary. Boston is on the list too, but I cannot see the Boston Bruins, given their arch rivals, assets to bring in a guy who's potentially going to play on their second or third pair. I just can't see it.
All fair points here. First of all, just like I said before, I think the asking price for Sharat right now it's not realistic. It's not realistic. I don't think that Ben Sharat is worth that. Actually, just look at me, unprepared. But I want to go to a hockey reference real quick just to kind of check up on his stats because, admittedly, I don't really know what he's done this season. 52 games played, 7 goals, 9 assists, 16 points, -19, but on a bad team, I really don't think about plus minus. This, just looking up and down the list here, plus, total ice time. Yes, he's been a top pair defenseman for the past couple of years now. This guy does not scream first round pick. He does not scream first round pick on paper. What he does scream is a guy that brings grit. He's a guy that brings size. He's a guy that brings grit. What team would be dumb enough to pay for size and grit? I've got 2 Canadian teams in mind on this one. Calgary, though I think they would honestly go and spend the money on bringing Mark Giordano back first. So I don't think they'd be in on Sharat. The other team that I think would actually be dumb enough to give a first-round pick would be Toronto. And Toronto has been hurting for defenders for a few seasons now. I think that they are realistically the team that would be desperate enough to just toss in a first-round pick, see where it goes, pick up Ben Sharat, and just see where he takes you on that journey to the Stanley Cup. Who knows? Maybe he is the difference maker for a guy like, for a team like Toronto. Do I think he is? Probably not. But I think Toronto would be the team that would be willing to give up a first round pick and just throw that away just to see if, another defender brings you that much closer to getting that Stanley Cup. But they haven't made it past the first round in years. So they've won as many first round playoff series as the Atlanta Thrashers at this point. Let's put it that way. Since, the Atlanta Thrashers inception and demise. So, yeah, I don't know. I see Toronto making this move. I don't think it's going to make them any better, but that's where I realistically see Sharat going. Honestly, the asking price might be too high that he might not go anywhere unless Montreal drops their demands. I don't know. I don't see it. Let's go quickly through this next one because he was kind of the centerpiece of our previous video. We'll see if kind of our attitudes have kind of changed on this one. John Klingberg, defenseman for the Dallas Stars. Tom, just real quick here. Do you think he's still leaving Dallas or do you think that he stays?
Here's the thing. Right now, just with their current situation where they're kind of on the bubble and could potentially make the playoffs, could very well see him staying unless something crazy happens within the next few months. I guess a team that knows him real well would be the Tampa Bay Lightning. If they are going to dangle him, I could easily see Tampa calling on him. I mean, yeah, he played very well against Tampa in the finals 2 years ago. If Tampa brings him in, they know exactly what they're getting.
Yeah, I mean, Tampa Bay could be a team that probably wouldn't mind giving up the capital to go and get a John Klingberg. I think Carolina could also make a lot of sense because this team is very top heavy at the moment. Top heavy meaning that they have a lot in offense, but defensively they have been missing some right-handed presence since Dougie Hamilton signed with New Jersey last year. So John Klingberg going to Carolina could be a team to really watch for come the trade deadline. That's really all I have to say about that. Realistically, could he also stay in Dallas? I think that is a very real possibility as well. Moving right along, we talked about Mark Giordano already, and I honestly think that he's destined to either stay in Seattle or go back to Calgary. So we're going to see if that really happens or not.
You think if he goes back, they'll give him the C back?
I think it's a very real possibility. Because they haven't named a captain since Mark Giordano left it. Have they?
I don't think so. I'm trying to find out.
The only other person that they could realistically name captain is Matt Tkachuk. I think he's the only person next in line.
Yeah, no, they haven't named one. So I'm wondering if they're just keeping that C warm for him.
I mean, one thing to kind of keep in the back pocket is, Matt Tkachuk, potential captaincy. Brian Burke gave the seal of approval in his book on that one. So one thing to keep in mind as well. A couple out there players, that, kind of like dream trades. Max Domey for the Columbus Blue Jackets. There are strong reports leading right now that Toronto could make a lot of sense for Max Domey, especially with ties to his father, Ty Domey, who played years for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Tom, do you see this as a realistic possibility?
I think this is more like a pipe dream, but the question is, again, what does Toronto have to give to Columbus to make it work? That's the other thing. What do they have to give to Columbus to make it work? And at the end of the day, does Toronto really even need him? The Leafs need goaltending and they need defensemen. They don't really need another top 6 or top 9 forward. I think they're okay in that area. Yeah. This is another one where I think teams will call on him, but I don't think anybody's going to be breaking the bank to get him. If Columbus keeps giving other teams unfair offers for him, I could see them saying, well, we tried, but no thanks.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know. I don't think Toronto could be the destination here. I think it's very more likely that he just stays in Columbus because Columbus has been heating up as of late. And I don't know if trading Max Domey is as advantageous if they're a team that's actually threatening to steal a playoff spot from somebody. I'm going to bring up 3 more names here, and 2 are from the same team. One's really out there. And then the other one is actually from a team we talked about before, the Philadelphia Flyers. So let's talk about that one first before we get to the 2 players on the same team. Talking about Travis Connectny here. And Travis Connectny is 25 years old, would normally be a building block for the Philadelphia Flyers, but if they're really serious about retooling, could be an easy candidate that could be dealt right now. Some interesting teams being named that could be linked to him. Tom, what are your thoughts here with Travis Connectny? Could he leave Philadelphia or is he going elsewhere?
It's 50-50 really. They have your New Jersey Devils on that list. That might make some sense as the Devils do have a lot of draft and prospect capital to send to the Flyers. The question is, do they want to make that kind of trade with the Flyers to bring in a guy who, I don't think the Devils are going to make playoffs this year. LA is a possible destination. If Philly doesn't ask for the moon for him, I could see maybe him going to LA to bolster their depth a little bit if they do make it. Toronto again, because Toronto just seems to be involved with everybody on this list. But yet again, Philly's a rebuilding team, and the reality is, I've said it before, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face like the jerseys Maple Leafs wear. What does Toronto have to make it worth it for the Flyers? I don't know if they have all that much. So yeah. I could easily see him staying. I guess if I had to pick, maybe LA, but it's a big maybe. The thing with LA is this: it's LA. LA is a team that might not even get out of the first round. So you got to be real careful with what you're going to do with the deadline if you're not going to even win a round. It does, especially if you're a young team like the Kings.
To play devil's advocate on that one, they're a team that might not necessarily leave the first round, but Travis Connectny, if you're bringing him in LA's case, especially at 25 years old, just turned 25 today, actually. I don't know. This could be a build for the future for LA. If you're thinking in LA's case, you suck up what you give up for team control of him for the next few years, and a player that I think is kind of Brad Marchand light in the sense that he's a guy that can put points on the board, has been a proven scorer early on in his career. He's in a bit of a rough patch because he's on a really rough Philadelphia team right now. But that being said, he's also a player that loves to agitate. And LA would love to pick up another player that is just really good at ruffling feathers and getting under team skin, forcing teams to take penalties. That's a player that I think LA is currently missing right now. Dustin Brown's days of doing that are over. And picking up another player like that, I think would be great for LA. New Jersey being on that list, I think that would be a great trade for New Jersey. I think picking up a player like Connectny that kind of goes against the grain would be really, really great. But I don't know. I don't know if New Jersey's a realistic destination right now for the New Jersey Devils. So I might go out on a limb and say LA here. It looks like we may have lost Tom here, which if that's the case, we're going to persevere on, and I'm going to take over here for a little bit and talk about a few other trade targets here before we get into our last two. So I'm going to go a little off the cuff here, if you guys don't mind. So let's talk a little bit down this list. We're looking, of course, at the fourthperiod.com trade watch list that they have provided here. Tom also just confirmed with me that he's going to be off for just a little bit here. So totally fine. Just looking up and down this list, we have some really interesting names that could be on the move. So we talked a little bit about Anaheim before. Anaheim's got a couple players on this list, but I think the most interesting name is Rickard Rakell. And got some interesting names on this list: Toronto, Pittsburgh, Boston, Tampa Bay, New York, St. Louis, Minnesota, all potential destinations for Rickard Rakell. And a few teams jump off the page for me. Minnesota is one team that jumps off the page for me. They could use another winger that can score, that can play top 9 minutes. And I also think Pittsburgh could be a team that could make a lot of sense as well for Rakell. And just to look up his stats real quick, just because, pardon me for not being as prepared on his stats. He's not having a bad year so far in limited time. In 49 games, 16 goals, 12 assists, 28 points. He hasn't been playing bad. He's been playing mostly like second line minutes here. He's averaging about 18 minutes a night. More than likely where he would go next, he would probably be playing second to third line minutes. And I think Pittsburgh or Minnesota could make a lot of sense there. Another player to watch on this list is Jeff Petry. And not to excite Philadelphia fans too much, but yeah, Philadelphia's on this list for Jeff Petry. And actually, I think Jeff Petry could make a lot of sense for a rebuilding Philadelphia team. Yes, he's on the older side. Yes, he's 34. Yes, he's got a cap hit of $6.25 million. But at the same time, though, they need experience. They need a guy that is experienced on defense. They need a guy who's more mobile on defense. They have some more immobile defensemen at the moment. Jeff Petry would be an immediate upgrade on that right-hand side and could make a lot of sense depending on what Philadelphia would have to give up to make that trade. It's also more likely that Jeff Petry stays in Montreal. We talked last episode when we talked about trade deadlines. We talked about Jake Debrusk, and his status with the Bruins has not changed since that last episode. At the time of our previous episode when we talked about the trade deadline was Jake Debrusk had requested a trade from the Boston Bruins. And since then, he has not pivoted from that stance. He's looking to get dealt no matter what. No, and you got a couple interesting names being linked. Some rebuilding teams too. Arizona, Edmonton, Seattle, San Jose, Anaheim. Edmonton could make a lot of sense just because Evander Kane is no more for Edmonton. Shock and spoiler alert there for anybody that was really kind of counting the seconds for when Evander Kane was going to do something stupid. But it could make a lot of sense for Edmonton to go out and pick up Jake Debrusk just to replace the production that Evander Kane now missing in action again. Other names on this list, JT Miller, we talked a little bit about before. This might be to Tom's chagrin here, but New York is a team that is heavily linked just simply because he'd be returning to the team that drafted him. And I think that would be a great homecoming. I actually think JT Miller would make a lot of sense for the New York Rangers. And I know Tom might disagree just because of the price tag, but I also, to echo what he said before, I don't know. JT Miller might not be leaving Vancouver after all, especially if Vancouver could be vying for a playoff spot. They might not be dealing anybody, Brock Besser included. Brock Besser is currently linked to a couple teams here, Toronto, Montreal, Los Angeles, and probably the more likely destination, which is New Jersey. And simply because that cap hit at $5.875 million, New Jersey can absorb that. And I think they're a team that would really benefit from taking on Brock Besser. Instant upgrade on the right-hand side, slots in very comfortably in either your top line or your second line. And now all of a sudden that right-hand side looks really strong with him and Jesper Bratt on the right-hand side for New Jersey. I just think there's a lot that makes sense there. More than likely, I think in the centerpiece for that deal is Pavel Zacha, and I think you could just kind of deal with that and also just add some other pieces into the mix as well. It all depends on what Vancouver is asking for. That is really the only name, Brock Besser meaning, that I could see Vancouver parting with at this deadline or just in the lead up to the playoffs. Other names on this list, I'm just going to gloss over real quick here. Dylan Strome is a name that's being floated around by Chicago at the moment, and Ottawa and Columbus are teams that are linked. I think Ottawa makes a lot of sense for Chicago. Ottawa certainly has the different pieces to give for Dylan Strome, and I think that Ottawa would benefit from picking up Dylan Strome as well. He's a player that I think would play very well in the top 9 for Ottawa and could be a very nice building piece and a player to slot in with Brady Tkachuk in the future as well. 25 years old as well, just something to keep in mind there. Also, to just keep going through quickly, we have an expiring contract here. Tomas Hertl. Oh my gosh, I can't pronounce names all of a sudden. 28 years old. He's got a cap hit currently of $5.6 million. And I think as a rental piece, I think St. Louis and Florida make a lot of sense potentially. New York, I know Tom's going to disagree. I know he's going to, say, oh, I don't know about that. Maybe not. But New York honestly would really, really benefit from picking up Hertl right now, just simply because he's a Swiss Army knife. He can play center. He can play right wing. And you need that kind of mobility, especially as we get closer to the playoffs, because you never know who's going to get hurt. And I think New York makes a lot of sense for Hurtle. In the offseason, that's a different story of where he could end up. I think, honestly, in the tri-state area, not that I'm being a homer or anything, but I am wearing a sweatshirt. I think New Jersey could make a lot of sense for picking up Hurtle in my mind, but that's just me. I don't know, just putting my tinfoil cap on. Speaking of New Jersey here, PK Subban is a player that could be dealt, but realistically, the price tag is really, really high. He's one of the highest paid defensemen in the entire league. He's got a $9 million cap hit. It is only for this year, and New Jersey could offer to pay half of it at least, which would sink that cap hit down to $4.5 million for the remainder of this year. But you got to have a team that has the cap space to do it, and not a lot of playoff teams have the cap space to make that move right now. So I don't know what the Devils end up doing there. Tom Fitzgerald has had a conversation at this point with PK Subban saying business is business, but we're not in the position right now that we want to re-sign you right now. That's not to say that that decision changes once they get to July 1st. But as of right now, Tom Fitzgerald has already stated, you know what? We might be looking for a deal at the deadline for you. Just be prepared. Very open conversation, very transparent conversation on Tom Fitzgerald's part. So I don't know. At that cap hit, you might need to terminate the contract first before you can really do anything. And that also means that New Jersey's just letting him walk for free. So I don't know if there's really any benefit for the Devils to really do that at this point. So moving right along right there. Other names on this list that look interesting to me. Joonas Korpisalo, goaltender for the Columbus Blue Jackets. Yes, he's had a really, really rough year with the Columbus Blue Jackets. He hasn't been doing that great. He is a unrestricted free agent at the end of this season. And couple interesting teams linked. Edmonton is one. Edmonton we're going to get back to in just a second because there's an interesting tidbit in terms of goaltender movement there. And Vegas. And I think Vegas could make a lot of sense for Joonas Korpisalo as a potential reliable backup for Vegas. And there are those that forget Korpisalo in the playoffs last year in that quadruple overtime made over 70 saves for the Columbus Blue Jackets. This is a proven playoff goaltender. He, just looks great in the playoffs, to be honest. So Vegas picking him up could make a lot of sense. Now, in Edmonton's case, Edmonton is currently looking for a goaltender right now. An interesting tidbit here. They barked up the New York Islanders tree not too long ago, reportedly, and they were looking for Semyon Varlamov, and Varlamov flat out said, I do not want to go to Edmonton. I don't know what that necessarily needs to tell you about the state of Edmonton at the moment, but if you got players that are refusing to go there, that is not a good sign at all. So interesting thing to note there. Even though they are also looking to upgrade a goaltender, they are floating around Mikko Koskinen in trade talks as well. Looking more up and down this list, we also have a player that Tom is very familiar with here. That's backup goaltender for the New York Rangers, Alexander Georgiev. And there's a lot of people that are saying this kid needs to be given a chance elsewhere to be a starting goaltender. There are those out there that saying, you know what, this guy's just a backup. I don't know what all the hype is about. But you never know unless he goes anywhere. And the only two teams that he's linked to, same two teams as before, Vegas and Edmonton. I think Edmonton could make a lot of sense for Alexander Georgiev, but it all depends on if Georgiev says, you know what, I do not want to go to Edmonton, which seems to be just a common occurrence right now for many players. So just kind of have to see him move on from there. Now, in Semyon Varlamov's case, to circle back to his corner, the only reason why Semyon Varlamov is even on the trade block at this point is because starting goaltender for the New York Islanders, Ilya Sorokin, has forced him out at this point. He does have a no trade list. He has a 16-team no trade list. Teams that are reportedly linked to him at the moment are Vegas, Colorado, and Washington. And Washington could be interesting just because, former team and good homecoming there. That and Ilya Samsonov has not been the reliable back that Washington has really been looking for. Semyon Varlamov has had proven success before, and it's just going to depend on what Washington needs to give up to get Semyon Varlamov. There's also the Russian connection there, familiarity there with Alexander Ovechkin and Evgeny Kuznetsov. So that could be a favorable destination. I think Colorado makes a little bit more sense. Colorado, I also want to address this one. I think Colorado's downfall towards the deadline is going to be if they sit on their hands and don't do anything. And that's to kind of echo the sentiments of TSN's own Bar Down in their podcast. I'm going to agree with them on this one. I think them not doing anything at the deadline would be catastrophic for them, because sitting on their hands and just saying, you know what, we're good already, it's not going to do any good for them. And if there's anything that has been proven over the past few years for Colorado as a contender, is that they need goaltending. And it's only because inevitably somebody gets hurt. Somebody always gets hurt. There's going to be a goaltender that Tom and I talk about in just a little bit. And yes, we have purposefully omitted him. I have purposefully omitted him just because I'm waiting for, whenever Tom's internet comes back, but it's fine. I'm here. It's all good. But I think Colorado needs to go out and get a goaltender. I think that is the first thing that they need to do as we approach this trade deadline. I think going and picking up a reliable backup for Darcy Kemper would be a really good idea. Now, that being said, it's not like Darcy Kemper has had a bad year at all. I think Darcy Kemper has been among one of the better goaltenders in the entire league at the current moment. Currently 40 games played for Darcy Kemper, 27 wins, 7 losses, 2 overtime losses. He's sporting a 2.57 goals against and a 917 save percentage. He's had a great year. He's had a really good year for Colorado, but he's not going to be able to do it on his own. What happens if he cools off? What happens if he gets hurt? Currently, Colorado's backup is Pavel Francouz. And to look up his stats from this year, he's also not doing bad, but it's in limited playing time. He has under 1,000 minutes right now, which is not much for, an NHL backup goaltender right now. 14 games played, 10 wins, 3 losses, 1 overtime loss, 2 shutouts to boot with that. But 246 goals against, 920 save percentage. By no means is that bad. But I think picking up insurance for Colorado is important. And we finally got Tom back here. Welcome back, Tom.
Hey, I don't know what happened. My laptop just out of nowhere decided to restart in the middle of doing this.
It's all good. I riffed while you were away, so it's all good. So we're glad to have you back. Last 2 players that we want to talk about here. The first one is an obvious name that could be dealt at the deadline. Another one, I think it's a little bit of a fantasy deal at the moment if he is dealt, but never say never. And they're both coming from the same team. So let's talk the obvious one first. Marc-Andre Fleury. Tom, where do you think is a potential landing spot for Marc-Andre Fleury?
I really don't know. If he goes back to Vegas, this is just asking for problems. It's asking for problems if he goes back to Vegas. He's said already he will not go to Washington. I can't see him going back to Pittsburgh. To tell you the truth, I think he's staying in Chicago. I don't think he's going anywhere.
He has stated in previously that he does like Chicago, that he likes being in the city of Chicago. That is also the very diplomatic thing to say and very appropriate thing to say for the fans. If I were this team, I would take a flyer and just see what the asking price is currently. If I'm Colorado, I would bark up that tree. Yes, Fleury is probably not your starting goaltender in Colorado. Kemper's got it locked down. But insurance is really good in the playoffs. And if one thing has been proven in Colorado, goaltenders get hurt. And it always happens to Colorado. You had to use Michael Hutchison twice because of this. I don't know. I just think for Colorado, it would make a lot of sense. He could also stay in Chicago at this point. Speaking of a person who could very well stay in Chicago, but I don't know why. A lot of people are really talking about him at the moment. Patrick Kane. I don't know if I see him actually being dealt, but stranger things have happened. Wayne Gretzky was dealt. That's all I can say.
Different circumstances, though.
Yes, different circumstance. Tom, if Patrick Kane were to get dealt, which I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's not getting dealt. He's not getting traded from Chicago, at least not this year. Where could you realistically see him going?
Well, I don't think this year, but I think it's a strong possibility next year. And call me a homer. Say what you will. He's definitely not going to Buffalo. He's definitely not going to Buffalo.
No.
I'd have to think that with Chicago having all the cap room and him saying a few years ago how much he loved playing with Panarin, could a reunion in New York be a possibility? There's been complaints this year about Panarin not having the right winger. I love Gerard Gallant. I never understood why he took Kakko off his line back in November. Kakko's hurt now. And there's been rumblings amongst people saying, Panarin needs better line mates. And maybe that better line mate is a Patrick Kane. Remember in Chicago, it was Panarin, Kane, and Artem Anisimov was their center. So whether it's Ryan Strome or Philip Hedl or potentially Morgan Barron down the line, that's a wash. But if the Rangers could somehow make it work without having to give up too much and getting Chicago to eat some salary, that one you kind of have. That one I would be most definitely interested in. He's still a good player. He's got the experience. 3 Stanley Cups. That's a slam dunk if you can get it done.
I think New York can make a lot of sense for Patrick Kane, to be quite honest. And I hate that. Disgusts me to be able to say that as a New Jersey Devils fan. But you know what? God damn it if Tom isn't right here. I just really do think that Patrick Kane in a New York Rangers uniform just kind of fits. I don't know why. It just kind of does. New York would have to kind of move heaven and earth to make it happen. And it would likely mean one of Lafreniere or Kakko being dealt in a move like this.
I'm not so sure about that though either. Now listen,
I think it's wishful thinking if you think that it doesn't take
okay, but it's another angle I want to explore, and I'm sorry to cut you off.
No, you're good.
But one thing to remember is this: what if Kane pretty much says, "Listen, I don't want to be here anymore, and I only want to go there," like Marty St. Louis did in Tampa when he forced Steve Yzerman's hand, saying, "I don't want to be here anymore, and the only place I'm going is New York. So make it effing happen."
I guess that's fair, and that's true.
And not for nothing, you bring up Wayne Gretzky being traded, man. What was the return in that Wayne Gretzky deal with Edmonton and LA? What was the return in the Wayne Gretzky deal with St. Louis and LA? What did Jaromir Jagr fetch to get himself traded? What did Jack Eichel fetch to get himself traded? Everybody talks high about these prospects, but at the end of the day, when you drag these things out for so long, a lot of times the return you get for that superstar player is very underwhelming.
To be fair, and to play devil's advocate on the Wayne Gretzky side, yeah, when you look at it on paper, it looks pretty underwhelming. In that trade for the Kings, they picked up Jimmy Carson, Martin Jelena, first-round picks in 89, 91, 93, and $15 million.
Okay,
one thing I should note, though.
I shouldn't have brought that one up. That was my fault. I'm talking more about like the St. Louis one where he wanted out of LA and he wanted to go to a contender.
Oh, no, that I get.
LA pretty much got beans for him.
Right, but what I was also going to say was, in Edmonton's case, they won a Stanley Cup after that. And Wayne Gretzky didn't.
That's true.
So this is one of those rare cases where I think dealing Gretzky actually kind of helped Edmonton in this case.
Okay, but
and Jimmy Carson was a 100-point player.
Look at the it did, but the guys they brought in, I mean, I don't know. What I'm saying is that you still had a pretty good core there in Edmonton, number one. Number two, they had to get him out of town because they knew they couldn't pay him.
Yeah.
And number 3, if Gretzky did indeed stay and you had the salary cap constraints that you have now, Edmonton would have probably won 4 more cups instead of just the 1.
Yeah. And you might be right, but it's all in hindsight at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Realistically, does Patty Kane get dealt this year? Probably not. I honestly don't see it. New York could make a lot of sense, though, for Patty Kane in the future, but we're just going to have to see what happens. And just like that, we're moving on to our final segment. We're skipping past players of the week this week just because it's going to be much of the same as we've been talking about for the past week. Mitch Marner, Austin Matthews,
Igor Shesterkin.
And I was also going to mention this week Jason Robertson. So honorable mention to Jason Robertson this past week for 2 straight hat tricks for the Dallas Stars. So good on you, my dude. But we're going to skip right past. We're going to go to the question of the day. Question of the day is, who do you think the biggest name of the trade deadline is going to be, and who the biggest name is going to be dealt? Tom, who do you think it is?
I still think it's Claude Giroux. It's all signs are pointing to Claude Giroux not staying in Philadelphia. It's just really a matter of where he winds up.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and agree that I think Claude Giroux is probably going to be the biggest name of this trade deadline that's going to be dealt. I'm going to throw in an honorable mention and say Jacob Chitrin, though, because I do think that that is a name that I think come the 11th hour, I think that he is a name that will inevitably get traded. I think that Arizona will end up getting it done with a team. Who that will be, I'm not sure. Not Toronto. And we're just going to have to see what happens. Sorry, Toronto fans. I'm sorry to rain on your parade, but it's just, I don't know. I just don't see it happening. Sorry. You can't have happiness, not this year. But as always, guys, what do you guys think? Do you agree? Do you disagree with our takes? Make sure you comment down below. And while you're there, make sure that you subscribe and hit the bell so that way you are aware anytime that our channel goes live. We go live almost every single day at this point with the MLS channel, with the NFL channel. So you got to check that out. And pretty soon, who knows? Maybe Tom and I could be coming at you with maybe a game reaction coming up sometime soon. You never know. Could be watching the Devils Rangers game coming up, or maybe even some Stanley Cup action as we near closer to the NHL playoffs. Stranger things have happened. So the only way you find out, make sure you subscribe, hit the bell, so that way you know anytime we post. And if you want to check out our website, check it out down below, iitsports.com, for all of our content. Besides our NHL content, you can check out our NFL, MLS, NCAA football, NBA, and wrestling content there as well. While you're there, hit up the shop, get yourself a t-shirt as low as $8, and make sure you follow us on Twitter below at I80_SportsNHL. And if you follow us already, thank you all for all of your support, because we greatly value all of your support. But I think with that, we'll let speculations fly for right now. We'll come back at you next week. Maybe some deals have kind of happened by then as we approach trade deadline, which once again, the trade deadline is March 21st, Monday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, I'm Brian. He's Tom. This has been yet another episode of NHL on I80 Sports.